Have you ever wondered who actually protects India's forests, seeds, and wildlife on paper, not just on the ground? In today's session, we'll understand biodiversity, the levels of biodiversity, the Biological Diversity Act 2002, the National Biodiversity Authority and its structure, state biodiversity boards, biodiversity management committees, and finally, the Convention on Biological Diversity along with its major protocols. By the end of this lecture, you'll clearly understand how biodiversity is defined, protected, and governed both in India and globally, which is extremely important from an exam point of view. Let's begin by understanding biodiversity. Bio means life, diversity means variety. So put together, biodiversity is the variety of life on Earth. It includes all life forms, from the unicellular fungi, protozoa, and bacteria to complex multicellular organisms such as plants, birds, fishes, and animals. It is the variety of flora and fauna on this planet Earth. The term biodiversity, short form of biological diversity, was coined by Walter G. Rosen in 1985. Remember this because it is frequently asked in examinations, especially who coined the term and in which year. Moving on to levels of biodiversity. Biological diversity includes three levels. The first level is genetic diversity. The next level is species diversity. And the third level is community and ecosystem diversity. These three levels move from the smallest scale, which is genes within a species, to the largest scale, which is entire ecosystems. Let's continue with few facts about India. The first fact is Mega Biodiversity Center. India hosts two of the world's 18 biodiversity hotspots, the Western Ghats and Eastern Himalayas. The next fact is flora and fauna diversity. India has over 49,000 plant species, that is 12.5% of global flora, and 81,000 plus animal species, that is 6.6% of global fauna. Another fact is sacred groves, traditionally protected forest patches preserving rare species and ecological balance. Following that, diverse ecosystems. The Thar Desert and the Himalayas are two regions rich in biodiversity in India. And finally, protected areas. 89 national parks and 504 wildlife sanctuaries, including Chilika Lake, a key wetland and Ramsar site. This is one of the most important concepts in this chapter, since these numbers around hotspots, national parks, and wildlife sanctuaries are commonly asked in exams. This brings us to Biological Diversity Act 2002. The Biological Diversity Act 2002 was passed by the Parliament of India to protect biodiversity and facilitate the sustainable management of biological resources with the local communities. The act was enacted to meet the requirements stipulated by the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, which India is a party to. The main objective is to ensure conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components, and fair usage of its resources in order to prevent overuse or eventual destruction of biodiversity. Let's shift our attention to Structure of Biodiversity Act 2002. If you observe the illustration, the act is implemented through a three-tiered structure. At the national level, we have the National Biodiversity Authority. At the state level, we have the State Biodiversity Board. And at the local level, we have the Biodiversity Management Committees. Notice how this connects with the topics we're going to discuss next, since each of these three bodies has its own defined role, which we'll go through one by one. Building on that idea, let's discuss National Biodiversity Authority. It is a statutory autonomous body under the MOEFCC. It was established in 2003 by the central government of India. Established under the Biological Diversity Act 2002. Headquarters is located in Chennai. Now let's look at its functions. The first function is monitoring and prevention of actions prohibited under the Act. The next function is providing advice to the government on how best to conserve biodiversity in India. Another function is prepare a report on how the government can select biological heritage sites. And finally, make concrete steps to prevent the grant of intellectual property rights regarding locally used biological resources or allied traditional knowledge. Keep this point in mind because we'll use it again later, especially the location of headquarters and the establishment year, which are common one-mark questions. Moving further, let's look at structure of NBA. NBA consists of the following members to be appointed by the central government. If you observe the illustration, it shows the organizational hierarchy of the NBA. We'll look at the exact composition of these members in detail shortly. This slide continues visually from the previous one, carrying forward the structure of NBA before we move into the detailed member list on the next slide. Let's continue with structure of NBA. NBA consists of the following members to be appointed by the central government. The first is a chairperson. The next is 3 ex officio members, 1 representing ministry dealing with tribal affairs and 2 representing ministry dealing with environment and forests. Following that, 7 ex officio members to represent the ministers of the central government dealing with agricultural research and education, biotechnology, ocean development, agriculture and cooperation, Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy, science and technology, scientific and industrial research. Think about this for a moment. That's 1 chairperson, 3 ex officio members, and 7 more ex officio members. So the composition question in exams usually asks you to give this exact breakup. One more important concept is State Biodiversity Board, established by the state government in accordance with Section 22 of the Act and deal with all matters relating to access by Indians for commercial purposes. Let's look at its functions. The first function is advising the state government on matters of biodiversity and its equitable distribution, or on matters relating to the conservation, sustainable use, or sharing equitable benefits. The next function is regulate granting of approvals or other requests for commercial utilization or biosurvey and bioutilization of any biological resource by people. And finally, perform such other functions as may be necessary to carry out the provisions of this act, or as may be prescribed by the state government. Let's continue with biodiversity management committees. According to Section 41 of the Act, every local body shall constitute the BMC within its area for the purpose of promoting conservation, sustainable use, and documentation of biological diversity, including preservation of habitats, conservation of land races, folk varieties and cultivars, domesticated stocks and breeds of animals, microorganisms, and chronicling of knowledge relating to biodiversity. Now let's look at its functions. To prepare the People's Biodiversity Register in consultation with local people. Remember this because it is frequently asked in examinations. The 3-tiered structure of NBA, SBB, and BMC, along with their respective sections, 22 for SBB and 41 for BMC, is a favorite exam question. Another important topic is people's initiatives. Let's look at a few examples. Bij Bachao Andolan, working on Himalayan crops. Deccan Development Society, working on dryland crops. SEVA, Anthra, Lokhit Pashu Samatan, working on livestock. Others include Navadanya, Green Foundation, ADS, Timbuktu Collective. Let's take a closer look at Bij Bachao Andolan. Bij Bachao Andolan, or BBA, aims to save traditional seeds and support local farming and culture. Farmer Vijay Jardati saw modern farming harming traditional methods, lowering yields and damaging soil with chemicals. Inspired by the Chipko movement, he started BBA to revive traditional crops and farming. BBA holds 150 paddy and 170 Rajma varieties, with 100 paddy types still grown. Can you relate this to a real-life example? This is a good case to remember because it directly connects grassroots conservation with the formal biodiversity protection framework we've been discussing. Let's shift our attention to Convention on Biological Diversity. The convention was opened for signature at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro on June 5, 1992, and remained open for signature until June 4, 1993, by which time it had received 168 signatures. Entered into force on December 29, 1993. The CBD's governing body is the Conference of the Parties, or COP. The Secretariat of the CBD is based in Montreal, Canada. Let's look at the objective of CBD. To promote conservation of biodiversity. the sustainable use of its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Notice how this objective is almost identical to the objective of India's own Biological Diversity Act 2002, which we discussed earlier, since the Indian Act was framed to meet this very convention's requirements. Moving on, this slide covers the two complementary agreements under CBD, the Cartagena Protocol and Nagoya Protocol. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity is an international treaty governing the movement of living modified organisms, or LMOs, resulting from modern biotechnology from one country to another. It was adopted on 29 January 2000 as a supplementary agreement to the CBD and entered into force on 11 September 2003. The Nagoya Protocol on Access to Genetic Resources and the Fair and Equitable Sharing of Benefits Arising from Their Utilization, or ABS, to the Convention on Biological Diversity is another supplementary agreement to the CBD. It provides a transparent legal framework for the effective implementation of one of the three objectives of the CBD, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. The Nagoya Protocol was adopted on 29 October 2010 in Nagoya, Japan, and entered into force on 12 October 2014. This is one of the most important concepts in this chapter. Students often mix up the adoption dates and entry into force dates of Cartagena and Nagoya, so pay close attention to these two sets of dates. Finally, let's discuss Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto, Japan, 1 to 11 December 1997. The first agreement between nations that aimed at mandate country-by-country reduction of emissions of 4 key greenhouse gases. More than 150 nations attend and adopt the first international treaty on controlling and reducing greenhouse gas. Protocol Groups Annex 1, Developed Nations, Non-Annex 1, Developing Countries. In 2009, COP13, Copenhagen, Denmark, one of the largest environmental meetings in history. Thank you. And that concludes today's teaching slides. If you found this lecture helpful, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with your friends. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next lecture.